The Nazis loved their symbolism is probably not a sentence that will inspire much shock in you, given that one or two of their symbols have become rather synonymous with the now long since rebuked, defeated ideology. What may actually come as a shock, however, is the fact that they adopted way more symbols than many first realise, and that they all had a surprising amount of consideration put into them. Interested? We certainly hope so, because said symbols are exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Let's begin. Let's kick things off with the obvious one, the Hakenkreuz or swastika, as we commonly know it. It is actually a very old symbol, predating the Nazis by many thousands of years and having held profound symbolic meaning in various ancient cultures. Even the term swastika itself refers to the ancient usage of the symbol rather than its more recent applications, with the term deriving from the Sanskrit for su, meaning good, and asti, meaning being, with the whole word translating roughly into well-being. As for where it turned up in the olden days, archaeological findings show that it's particularly prominent in India, hence us using a Sanskrit word for it nowadays, and also China. For them, the swastika often symbolized prosperity, balance, and cosmic order. In Buddhist and Hindu traditions, the swastika remains a sacred symbol to this very day, representing good fortune and the eternal cycle of life. It also showed up in pre-colonization Native American cultures, with variations of the symbol having been found in pottery and textiles, often being linked to spiritual harmony and natural forces. A common misconception, however, is that the Nazis pilfered the symbol directly from those aforementioned societies and cultures, whereas in reality, it was all part of Nazism's revitalizers and custodians of traditional Germanic culture shtick, with the direct inspiration for their swastika being the one used by prehistoric German and German-adjacent tribes, as can be seen today on surviving combs such as this one, buckets such as this one, and pottery like these. Through this connection, it was reasoned the Nazis were loudly and proudly shouting their veneration of their ancient forerunners from the rooftops, and thus legitimizing themselves as the inheritors of their cultural mantle. As for when the Nazis adopted it, that was very early on in their history indeed, being only a few months after the party transformed from its early German Workers' Party, or DAP, incarnation, when it was headed by Anton Drexler, into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP, incarnation that we know it all as today, when it was increasingly under the control of Adolf Hitler instead. As for the specifics, the rebrand occurred on the 24th of February 1920, and the official adoption of the swastika came on the 7th of August that same year at a party conference held in Salzburg. At risk of getting a bit GCSE English lit with it all, perhaps for the reason we should consider the swastika not as a symbol of Nazism but of Hitler himself, so much as those two things can never be separated anyway. For it was under the swastika explicitly that the party transformed from a bunch of aimless anti-Semitic nutters into Hitler's very well-aimed and focused cohort of anti-Semitic nutters. And by popping open the channel's trusty copy of Mein Kampf, we can also find some interesting extra details about Hitler's rationale in adopting the symbol. For example, quote, "After innumerable trials, I decided upon a final form, a flag of red material with a white disc bearing in its center a black swastika. After many trials, I obtained the correct proportions between the dimensions of the flag and of the white central disc, as well as that of the swastika, and this is how it has remained ever since." As well as, quote, "The swastika signified the mission allotted to us, the struggle for the victory of Aryan mankind, and at the same time the triumph of the ideal of creative work, which is in itself and always will be anti-Semitic." And finally, quote, "The new flag appeared in public in the midsummer of 1920. It suited our movement admirably, both being new and young. Not a soul had seen this flag before. Its effect at the first presentation was most impressive. In short, I invented it. Aren't I very clever for doing so? My God, I do hate those pesky Jews." Standard Hitler waffle, really. Once adopted though, the swastika became ubiquitous, with Nazism appearing on flags, banners, uniforms, and their buildings. When they took power, however, and the party standard became the national flag, things really got out of hand. The only way we can describe it is, imagine the Nazis running a Shopify merch shop, and you pretty much have the idea, as they really would slap a swastika on any old with almost comic absurdity. For example, you had your banners for buildings, normal flags, and car pennants, which were used both for official and diplomatic purposes and just by enthusiastic motoring Nazis, much in the same way as we break out our car flags today when the World Cup is on. That's all pretty standard fare though, but it does get weird, such as when it found its way onto pocket knives, desk ornaments, cutlery, and even board games. Truly, they would slap it on anything if they could sniff a Reichsmark or two in it. We can only hope our first merch line proves more tasteful. Today, with Nazism thankfully being a dead ideology, at least in real terms, the titled to 45 degrees explicitly Nazi version is a relic usually only ever spotted in museums and on telly documentaries. The old school, normal version lives on in Asia, however, the locals that way have no interest in seeing their truly ancient symbol be besmirched by a couple of decades worth of associations with a single European nutter and his band of depraved goons. However, we will draw your focus back to our use of the word usually when discussing the explicitly Nazi version of the swastika being dead, because when you travel in Asia, you will stumble upon the odd example peddled by, what's the polite way to put this? People who either don't understand or simply don't care about its connotations. For example, in Japan, there is a certain Tokyo nightlife magnate who's been known to run interestingly themed events from time to time. And in Seoul, there's a bar that looks like, well, this. Along a similar line, while it wasn't exactly a swastika, you can also find Hitler brand ice cream in India. And when I lived in Thailand, the guy that fried my noodles down the street from my house had one on his hand. The party adler, or party eagle, is another Nazi symbol you are likely already familiar with, but have probably never given much thought to what it actually means. You know the one? It's the giant eagle you always see in period photographs derived from the older Reichsadler, or imperial eagle, of the Holy Roman Empire, itself derived from the ancient Roman aquila, literally eagle symbol. The Parteiadler forewent the traditional rounded form of past incarnations and replaced it with a far sharper and more angular version, one whose wings were spread wide and which was clutching a swastika in its claws. This change was very intentional too. The swastika, obviously, was an attempt to make the Nazi credentials of the new eagle in your face and indisputable, and the sharper lines and wider spread of the wings were intended to appear much more aggressive, a representation of a new Germany that had thrown off the kid gloves of the Weimar era and supposedly rediscovered its spine, had no intention of being pushed around any longer. As for when the Parteiadler began, that would be 1933, during the Nazis' initial rise to power. That early stage when they were still LARPing as being democratic, but were embroiled in various cloak and dagger deals and games to remove both their opposition and those who had aided them in coming to power. Slowly but surely. More specifically, it was this version that was unveiled, the one that is looking to the right. The Nazis made a big deal of this too, with the adoption process involving a series of ceremonial unveilings, each of which was accompanied by a speech or two extolling its ideological significance. That version, however, despite how highly it was lauded, didn't remain in vogue for long, and instead it was decided in 1935 that it should look to the left instead, like this. And while both were used long term, it was the one facing to the left that was ultimately way more common. The reasons for this change are unclear too. Some sources claim that this was intended to be a distinction between the Parteiadler, intended to represent the state, which would be the one looking to the left, and the one intended to represent the party, which would be the one looking to the right. However, as this claim isn't repeated as a matter of course, or quite frankly by well-established historians we know and trust, as well as not being mentioned in the literal gigabytes worth of primary sources our writer has stockpiled after years of being a massive nerd for this stuff, we're reluctant to repeat this to you as fact. But just know it's something that some people claim. It's also worth noting that as time went on, different branches of the Nazi regime would go on to adopt their own specific versions of the Parteiadler. The SS, for example, adopted this one in 1936, which always looked to the right and had wings that were clipped on their top corners. Some historians like to get a bit over-analytical about this and claim that the clipped wings were intended to represent the SS's subservience to the main party apparatus. But while this is certainly a realistic prospect, particularly after the 1934 Night of the Long Knives, which saw the SA be violently brought to heel after it started having meddlesome ideas about the Nazi agenda and how it should be implemented, we have yet to see anything that absolutely confirms this claim. So again, take it with a pinch of salt, and just know it's something that some people claim. That Heer, or Army, also had its own variant, specifically this one. Nothing much to say about this one, it's simpler, only having 3 lines to its wings, always looked to the right, and was adopted in 1935, with them sticking it primarily on their tunics, which you can see in this picture, as well as anywhere else that they needed to make something as theirs. The Kriegsmarine or Navy also had their own version. It was exactly the same as the Heer version, but gold. As for the Luftwaffe or Air Force version, that's easy to spot for being way more stylized, as you can tell here. Interestingly too, while this one typically faced to the right, you do come across the odd example where it faces the left. The reasons for this, again, seemingly being unknown at present. Non-militarized organizations also had their own unique Adlers, with there being this narrower one for the SA, this one for the National Socialist Motor Corps, this one for the Hitler Youth, and this one for the Gestapo. The widespread adoption and adaptation of the Partyadler variations across the Nazi regime underscored its importance as a symbol of unity and power. By tailoring the emblem to different branches and functions, the Nazis ensured that every facet of their governance and military operations carried a clear visual representation of their ideology, making the Partyadler not just a symbol of Nazi authority, but a visual shorthand for the omnipresence of their ideology in all aspects of German life. Consider this a call to arms for any historians in the audience too, who may be twiddling their thumbs wondering what their next book might be about, because we don't know if you noticed, but the Partyadler and its full history and meaning is actually something which is in dire need of some scholarly attention, as there's huge parts of the story that we just don't know yet. When it comes to Nazi symbols, there is also the matter of pseudo-runes, so called because while they very much are runes by the strictest definition of the word, they are also ahistorical bollocks. Complete nonsense runes that were either totally made up by the Nazis simply for their aesthetics, or heavily warped from their original historical usage and presentation. As for how they were made up, that would largely be through the SS, whose leader, Heinrich Himmler, was really into this stuff. Most of them were inspired by the so-called Armanen runes developed by the Austrian mystic Guido von List in 1902, which themselves were made up by him, quite literally, while he was bored during a state of temporary blindness. The questionable nature of the runes mattered not to Himmler's SS, however, because you see, von List was what you would call a Völkisch nationalist, and therefore one of his own as far as Himmler was concerned. If you are wondering too, Völkisch nationalism is a kind of proto-Nazi nationalism that saw national identity as being defined in large part by the soil that the people had stood upon and the blood that countless generations had soaked into it. It's a weird thing to have to get into, particularly in passing as mere framing for a wider discussion, but just remember it as proto-Nazism and you'll more or less be on the right track. Regarding the runes the SS came up with off the back of von List's work, however, they were all designed by SS Sturmhauptführer Walter Heck, a graphic designer who, among other things, also created the iconic black SS uniform in 1933. The most famous of the lot would probably be his Sieg rune, as it went on to become the main symbol of the SS after Himmler noticed the similarity in shape between the rune and the Latin letters that were used to represent his organization when it was abbreviated anyway. Originally, it had been intended to have a whole other meaning, with it being meant to represent the concept of victory, and if ever there was an alien concept to the SS, it was victory. So ubiquitous did the rune become in Nazi Germany, thanks to the SS sending it mainstream, that Nazi-era typewriters even evolved to incorporate a dedicated function for typing it, as you can see on this example here, where it was typable with a Shift 3. Beyond the famous one, however, another significant rune the SS adopted was the Eif rune, which represented zeal or enthusiasm. This rune, a rotated and mirrored version of the traditional Eichwas rune, was particularly associated with Adolf Hitler's personal adjutants, such as Rudolf Hess. Not for any particularly well-considered reason, mind you, it just so happened that a lot of big hats happened to take a shine to it. Then there was the Ger rune, which denoted communal spirit. The SS were particularly keen on this one, in no small part due to their own unique interpretation of that idea, which was more of a shut up and obey type vibe. It was also later adopted by the divisional insignia of the 11th SS Volunteer Panzer Grenadier Division Nordland, for whom its community was meant to symbolize a shared purpose and unity under National Socialism. Faith as an unwavering belief in Nazi philosophy also found its way into a rune, specifically the Hagel one. This featured prominently in SS ceremonies, particularly weddings, weirdly, and was also engraved on the SS Ehrenring, an award that held no official bearing but was given out to members of the SS who had won Himmler's favour. Further to that, the rune also later became the divisional insignia for the 6th SS Mountain Division Nord. As for the Leben rune, it was used to represent life, and so naturally became a favourite among children's organisations, maternal wards, and most chillingly, the Lebensborn Pogrom, a semi-secret SS organisation that sought to bolster Aryan birth rates through the provision of Aryan-only child birthing and rearing facilities, adoption programs, and mass kidnapping of genetically correct children in Germany's occupied territories. Also of note is the inverted counterpart to the Leben rune, the Tod rune, which, as you might suspect from its design, represented the opposite of life, death. It was frequently used to mark graves and obituaries in the place of traditional Christian symbols. Next, consider this one, the Odal rune, which symbolised kinship, family, and blood unity. Note that last bit in particular, because the SS were quite big on their racial hygiene, as you no doubt know, so they were all about this one. It became the chosen rune of the SS Rasse- und Siedlungsschutzamt, so sorry for my pronunciation there, the department responsible for maintaining the racial purity of the SS, as well as the 7th SS Volunteer Mountain Division Prinz Eugene. The Opfer rune, used to symbolise sacrifice, actually had its origins outside the Nazis, with it being created by the Stahlhelm, a part military veterans association, part paramilitary organisation of the Weimar period. The Nazis, however, who had quite the cordial relationship with Stahlhelm, took the rune for themselves and tightened its focus to represent those who died during the 1923 Beer Hall Putsch specifically, as well as National Socialist martyrs more broadly, something that became very important indeed as the ideology played out in full and the martyrs soon numbered in the million as a result. Finally, the Nazis used the Tyr rune, which, being named after the Germanic god of war and justice, represented leadership in battle. The SS would frequently use it on grave markers in the place of traditional Christian crosses. It was also adopted by the 32nd SS Volunteer Grenadier Division January the 30th, as well as the SS Officer Training Academy. By appropriating and bastardizing ancient symbols, the SS hoped to not only cultivate a sense of historical continuity, but also create a visual lexicon that communicated its values and mission. And in that, they certainly succeeded, that's for sure, because while National Socialism may now stand defeated and vindicated as naught but political flat earthery, the few chaps and chapettes who remain enthusiastic about the ideology somehow continue to fly them to this day. The infamous Totenkopf, or Death's Head, is actually a symbol that predates National Socialism by centuries, first emerging in the 18th century as a Prussian military emblem. Back then, it simply represented loyalty unto death, being a stark and macabre reminder of a soldier's ultimate duty to sacrifice themselves for their cause, if needed. Over time, it then evolved further to become a more generic symbol of elite units, with the Hussars in particular really rolling with it, as you can see here on the uniforms of both August von Mackensen and Kaiser Wilhelm II himself. Come the Nazi period, this association with all things elite remained, and so it was the perfect symbol for the SS to adopt, which was ever pushing to become a proper military formation and not just a simple bodyguard unit. They used it in a multitude of different ways too. One way, as per the now immortalised Mitchell and Webb sketch, saw them place it on all of their caps, from the posh visor ones to the cheap and cheerful field ones. Beyond that, however, it was also adopted as divisional insignia by the 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf, who placed it on their collar tabs, as you can just about make out on the 3 camoed up fellows in this picture. Oh, and because your right today is kind of a kit nerd, let's also point out that every photograph you see of someone with a Totenkopf on their collar signifies a member of the SS, because here tank crews also wore it, as you can see. Admittedly, the black uniform doesn't help with the whole not looking SS thing, but trust us, that chap was regular army and his uniform is very representative. A super quick last one now, because we're really starting to push up against our word limit, specifically a quick one on the Iron Cross. Established by King Frederick William III of Prussia in 1813, it was awarded for acts of bravery and leadership during the War of Liberation against Napoleon. The design, a black cross with white edges, was inspired by the Teutonic Order, a medieval Germanic chivalric order. Over the years, the Iron Cross came to symbolize honor, valor, and a proud martial tradition within Germany, evolving through various iterations during the Franco-Prussian War, the First World War, and eventually the Weimar Republic. The Nazis, however, appropriated this venerable symbol to further their agenda. Upon ascending to power, Hitler reintroduced the Iron Cross in 1939 as a military decoration for acts of valor during World War II. He altered its design to incorporate the swastika at its center, thus linking the symbol's legacy with the Nazi regime. This adaptation served a dual purpose. On the one hand, it reinforced continuity with Germany's military history, while on the other, it embedded Nazi ideology within the nation's most revered military iconography. The Nazi-era Iron Cross was awarded in various grades, ranging from the basic second class to the prestigious Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds. By the end of the war, over 4.5 million Iron Crosses had been distributed. Also closely related is the Balkenkreuz or Bar Cross. Like the Iron Cross, it has its roots in Teutonic symbolism, and they started using it during World War I as a roundel on aircraft. Come World War II, they were also slapping it on tanks and basically anything else that needed to be quickly identified as German at a glance. Well, we said that we were pushing the word limit in the last chapter, so here's your mega trim conclusion to bring us to an end. Wow, wasn't that all jolly interesting? Yes, it was. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe, end of video.